Matthew Blittner from Sportsology joined me on today's episode to reflect on the Devils' offseason so far and some of his expectations heading into the new year. There's a lot to break down alongside Matthew. Buckle up, everybody.
You're Locked On Devils, your daily podcast on the New Jersey Devils, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, this is Bryce Salvador, and you're Locked On Devils with Trey Matthews.
Scores! Oh, Steven stepped up, nailed it. Brodor's got the puck. What a shot. The Devils win the Stanley Cup.
Alrighty now, what is up, New Jersey? Welcome back to the Locked On Devils podcast here at the Locked On Network. I'm your host, college hockey play announcer, Devils Wire Pucks Pitchforks, and also part-time credential media member, Trey Matthews. Joining me for the first time ever here at Locked On Devils is a man who also covers the Devils for Sportsology. More recently, he landed a gig covering the Yankees for Athlon Sports. Some of his past ventures include MSG, The Hockey News, New York Sports Day, and more. It's my buddy, Matthew Blittner. Matthew, how you doing?
Great to be here. Trey, thanks for having me on. And, what an introduction. Really makes me sound like I've done a lot.
Well, it's your first time appearing on my platform, so I got to hype you up a little bit.
Sure. I wish I could return the favor.
Well, maybe you could become a recurring guest similar to other people who appear. How about that?
Sure, whatever you need.
Awesome. And Matthew, before the recording, you told me that you and Jim Behringer actually did a podcast. What was that about?
So our podcast is called the Blue Line Blast Podcast. Drops once a week, generally on Tuesdays, but due to some technical issues, our new episode will be dropping tomorrow on Wednesday instead of today on Tuesday. And we've now been doing it since end of April, roughly. We started, the Devils were down in Carolina for the beginning of their playoff series, and then outside of like 1 or 2 weeks, we've done it pretty much every week since.
Awesome. Jim's also a friend of the show, recurring guest, had him on recently. Let's start with the 2024-2025 season for the Devils, Matthew. What did you notice from your perspective covering this team up in the press box?
Well, one thing stuck out immediately, and that was that with their solidified goaltending tandem of Jacob Markstrom and Jake Allen, they actually, were a very, very good team. So if you look at them two years prior, they were a very good team almost in spite of their goaltending. Their goaltending was sort of, at a high in terms of less, like, you knew it was unsustainable. The defense was, pretty damn good in front of it. But of course, the offense and special teams were carrying the team. Then the following year, they trashed and burned. They got rid of Damon Severson, who was a key blue liner. They went with a little bit of a youth movement on the back end. Luke Hughes, Simon Nemec. They didn't really have, they didn't improve their goaltending. And of course, goaltending being the fickle position that it is, and very volatile year over year in terms of performance historically, it regressed, not even regressed to the mean, it regressed below the mean. And, injuries hit, and you saw that, they missed the playoffs because of it. So I give Tom Fitzgerald and his team credit. They went out, they got Jake Allen to be the backup. They made the big swing for Jacob Markstrom. After saying they were doing big game hunting, well, they went big game hunting. They caught their big game. It was the equivalent of catching like 100-pound bass, during a fishing contest. And they put the goaltending together. They shored up the defense. They didn't only go with youth in big moments. They went out and got Brendan Dillon. They went out and got Brett Pesce. Luke Hughes was not relied upon in the early going to be that guy. Yes, he sort of became that guy later on in the season, but that was once he matured a little bit. Out of the three positions in the league, forward, defense, and goalies, it's hardest for young defensemen to adjust to the NHL. So to be thrown into the fire, you're going to have your ups and downs. So they were able to bring him along a little bit slowly until Dougie Hamilton. While Dougie Hamilton was out, that's when he then stepped up, and you really saw it in a big way in the playoffs. Simone Nemec required some, a trip back down to the minors, but you saw what he could do in the playoffs. And then the big thing was injuries again. I mean, they lost Jack Hughes, shortly after Christmas, and the offense suffered because of that. They still have two very capable top lines to make it a very good top six. But when you're going games on end with no consistent scoring in the bottom six, that's going to be a problem. So your top six is not going to score every night. Just that's the way hockey is. And so when they didn't have that depth scoring, they started to come back down to the path. I believe they were third in the league in terms of best in most points and best record going into Christmas. And then you saw they ended up finishing third in their division, had to sweat it out, and with potential wildcard teams chasing them down at the end of the season. And so, if they can shore up the bottom six, if they can get healthy, they can be a team to be reckoned with.
Before we continue with today's episode, let me tell you guys about FanDuel. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action. Why not make it a little more thrilling with FanDuel? You can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. I've been using FanDuel to track my favorite matchups, and the app makes it fresh with new daily promotions and fun ways to bet. It's easy to use, fast to pay out, and makes even regular season games feel like must-watch events. Whether I'm placing a same-game parlay or watching a bet right into the ninth inning, FanDuel makes it feel like I'm a part of the action. New to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. Please remember to always gamble responsibly. Okay, let's get back to today's discussion. Take it away once again. I definitely agree with what a lot of you just said, and you went back a few seasons as well, just talking about how they got to this point. I think it's safe to say the goaltending, it's one of the best in the NHL, and it's been many years since I've been able to say that about the Devils. I think Jacob Markstrom, Jake Allen, also Nico Daws, very good team that the Devils have in net. Markstrom had 4 shutouts. Allen had 4 shutouts. Daws had 1 shutout, and in the few games he did appear in, he was really good. Unfortunately, I think his time with the Devils is coming close to an end just because the Devils can no longer send him down to the minors without any repercussion. So the goaltending is good. Defense took a few steps forward, I would say, as well. Definitely got more aggressive, especially with the additions of Stefan Nason, Paul Cotter. But like you said, depth scoring was a big struggle for the Devils this time around. Yes, they recorded a lot of shutouts, but they also got shut out a lot of times themselves. And now it led to the, I guess, quote unquote, controversial press conference in which Tom Fitzgerald says, what is depth scoring? Like, what are we doing? And I'm just like, well, this might be a hot take, but I talked about it with Jim in one of our discussions. Tyler Toffoli, while he's not labeled a depth scorer, it's safe to say, like a couple seasons ago, he really put the Devils' offense over the edge. He was the leading goal scorer for the team before he was dealt to Winnipeg, and the Devils never really replaced that. So I think that was also a big issue. There was also another player under scrutiny. I'm not going to say his name, but I think you know who I'm referring to. Unfortunate circumstance. I'm really hoping for the best possible outcome, but I think my audience knows who I'm referring to. But
you're gonna get a verdict in a couple of days.
Yeah, I'm curious to see how that goes down. Honestly, I think like many of the hockey world, I hope justice is served. We'll see how it unfolds. I'm not a legal expert. Matthew's not a legal expert either. So we'll just.
But I do have a lot of friends who are lawyers, so
I'll
more versed than normal in this.
Okay. Well, I'll ask you about it after this recording. I'll ask you about it because I'm curious because I hear all these legal terms. I'm like I don't understand any of it. So Devils never really replaced that, but they got better goaltending. They got more physical. Defense took a few steps forward. Now, let's fast forward to this offseason, shall we? The Devils extended Jake Allen. I think that was a pretty good deal. And I think Fitzy took a play out of Zito's playbook in Florida, which is how do you re-sign someone to a team-friendly deal that's really good for your team, because that contract is not going to age poorly for the Devils, because when Father Time does catch up to Jake Allen, you can hide it in the minors, you can buy him out, you can put him on LTIR, whatever the case might be. That contract's not going to come back to bite the Devils. So Jake Allen took a really team-friendly deal. They extended Cody Glass. I think they realized that once he hit the open market, a lot of teams were going to bid for him. So Fitzy's like, okay, I guess we do have to give him a qualifying offer. Bit of an overpay, but I'm not really going to toss and turn at night about it. So they get Connor Brown. I'm okay with that. I mean, I don't like the trade protection because I think that's what got Fitzy in trouble a few months ago during the trade deadline. And they got Evgeny Dodonov, getting up there in age. It's not the fastest skater. We'll see how that pans out. What are your thoughts on the offseason so far? Because it seems like we're waiting for that other domino piece to fall, and that's the Luke Hughes contract. Who's staying, who's going, Palat, Hamilton, or Mercer? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's a loaded question. So I'll start.
Take your time. We got all the time in the world.
So when the Jake Allen signing first became official, I was like, all right, definitely too many years, but it's obviously necessary to lower the average annual. So that's fine. He also gets sheltered. He's only going to be playing, let's say, 30, 40 games a year. This is why I actually disagree with something that you said earlier about Nito Dawes. I would do everything possible to hold on to Nito Dawes. So you're going to need your depth. Let's be honest. Teams do not get through a season anymore with just 2 goaltenders. Just doesn't happen. It's like Major League Baseball. Teams do not get by with just 5 starting pitchers. That's not the way the game is played anymore. And I understand that, they can't put him on waiver. They can't send him down without having to pass through waivers and risk losing him and everything. They have to find a way to keep Nito Dawes because Jake Allen and Jacob Markstrom are both getting up there in age. Goaltending, as I said earlier, is a volatile year-over-year performance position. They're going to need Dawes at some point sooner rather than later. And we've seen since Marty left, you've seen how they've struggled to have a solid goaltending tandem. So I would try to hold on to him whatever way possible.
Well, let me just. I would love to keep Nico Dawes on the roster, but teams don't really carry 3 goalies on their active roster because you can only dress 2 of them. So is it worth keeping Nico Dawes around if he's going to be a healthy scratch, like anywhere from 90 to 95% of the time? I love him, but if he goes on waivers, he's getting claimed within the next few minutes.
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. There are ways that you can sneak him through waivers. And a smart GM with his team will be able to pass him through sneakily. Yes, it is a risk, but you will. There are ways to do it. But moving on from Dawes, I don't really care much for the Connor Brown signing. It's neither here nor there. Play on the third line. He to me, he's going to basically be what Eric Holla was. He'll get a couple goals in there. Every now and again, you'll be like, oh, it's great that we have him. And then other than that, you'll be like, all right, well, what are we doing here? Cody Glass did not have that much favor with Sheldon Keefe. He had more favor than Daniel Sprong, but he didn't have, he's not really the answer. If you're counting on Cody Glass to be, stalwart on your third line to provide depth scoring, you're just going to be disappointed. Dadonov is, in my opinion, the most interesting signing that they've made because, and again, you said that he's getting up there in age, which is true, but he is coming off of a 2020 season, 20 goals, 20 assists. What I would do, and, let's see how the season plays out. Let's see how chemistry shakes out among line mates and stuff. Put him on the top line in place of Andre Palat. Andre Palat is not a top line guy.
I respectfully, I disagree with that. That's a disaster waiting to happen because he's too slow. He can't
Well,
keep up.
but
He can't keep up.
you can have him be a net front guy. You can have him be around the net. He's not a nose for the net. And again, maybe not the top line, but the second line. You put him in the top 6. You bump Palat down to the third line, which is where Palat really should be.
Respectfully, Palat should be dealt out of here.
Well, and I'm going to get to that in a minute. Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Continue. I'm sorry.
Zadorov, when you've got a nose for the net, look, it's very difficult to score in the National Hockey League. And I know we've seen more 60-goal scorers in the last few years than we had in the 20 years prior, but it's still very difficult to score. So a guy who's proven that he can score 20 goals in Zadorov, you got to put him in your top 6. Again, chemistry-wise, I understand he's not the fastest guy. You don't need every player in the world to have speed, especially if you have to grind it out, especially you have to get pucks in net. So let's face it, one of the issues that the Devils had last year was when teams would slow their speed, they had no way to score. When teams would shut down their transition game, they had no way to generate offense. So if you have a guy who has a nose for the net, who can just be that guy who, he's going to be, within 5 to 10 feet of the net, you don't need him to be fast. That's what his line mates are for. Okay, it's not like he's skating there with anchors tied to his skates. It's not like he's you or me who's going to be falling down trying to get up the ice with his teammates. Let's call it what it is. He's not a bad skater. Yeah, he's not blessed with great foot speed of a 25-year-old, but he can still do what he's got to do. And with the rest of it, with Andre Palat, I mean, he's got the winning pedigree, which I know is what attracted the Devils in the first place. Yes, it's a high average annual salary. I am okay with it if they trade him. I'm not okay with it if they don't find someone to replace him for the third or fourth line, preferably the third line, because Platt's not really a fourth line guy. You saw that the Tatar experiment didn't really work out last year, even though obviously a few years prior it had. And again, as you mentioned, things are going to be very dependent on the Luke Hughes extension. And this might be an unpopular opinion, and just based upon everything that you've said so far, I'm the judge that you would probably disagree with it too. I would not trade Dougie Hamilton whatsoever this year. I'm not doing it. We saw 2 years ago how they got rid of Damon Severson, and they got rid of I can't remember who the other
Ryan Graves.
Yeah, and they got rid of Graves. And yeah, none of them are superstar defensemen, but they worked for the Devils and what they needed, and they allowed the young kids like Luke, like Nemec to come up, play some sheltered minutes, get their feet wet in the NHL. As I said before, it's very difficult for young defensemen to grow in the National Hockey League. They're going to take their bumps, okay? Let's be very honest. They're going to take their bumps. It's part of the maturing process. It's part of the game. And there's more difficulty with young defensemen than there are with young forwards and young goaltenders, just the way the game is played. But you want to have Luke, who, started to show towards the end of last year that he can, start to be that guy, but he still has things to work on. Nemec is not, I'll call Nemec a step behind Luke in development. I know Seamus Casey is, somewhat knocked on the door, but he's a step behind Nemec even. If you all of a sudden go with that youth movement again, you're going to expose your goaltending, which is now a year older, okay? Allen and Markstrom are both a year older now, and they're not, yes, they were good for what they did last year, but again, it's a volatile position, and you need to have the solid defense there. Plus, on special teams, Dougie is still, yes, I know Dougie gets hurt, but you know what you can get out of him. He provides that offense, or that threat of offense. Yes, he has some turnover issues, but he is that guy who can eat those minutes and who can be that guy on the blue line. Yes, from a cap perspective, it's going to be difficult depending on what Luke's contract number comes in at. But you can't go and say, oh, well, we took 2 steps forward. We made the playoffs. We did this. Luke matured. We're ready to do this. And then take 3 steps back by making the same mistake that you made 2 years ago. I would absolutely not trade Dougie this year. You want to talk about trading Dougie in, after this year, if there's another defenseman that becomes available or something like that, I'm all ears. But for this year, it would be a massive mistake to trade Dougie Hamilton.
So I actually agree with you. I don't want to trade Dougie. I think he gets a too much crap for what he deserves. It's been proven, like you said, the past few seasons, the Devils don't improve when Dougie is out. And I had our colleague Jim Behringer on this show recently, and we were basically echoing the same thing, which is something else you need to factor in is that Jonathan Kovacevic will be on the LTIR before the start of the season. And Jim is hearing that he could be out until December or January, and he's going to have to be sent down to the AHL in order to fully recover, to do a rehab. So it's like, if you were to trade Dougie, get some money, that's great and all, but who's going to slide into that position to replace him? Are you going to have, is it going to be Shimon Nemitz, Seamus Casey? Who's going to generate that offense out in front, especially on the power play? Dougie is what really puts the power play over the edge, and I've been saying that ad nauseum. And another thing is, yes, Dougie does turn the puck over, but you know who else turns the puck over a lot? He actually led the team, Jonathan Kovacevic, but nobody besides Sheldon Keefe has called Jonathan Kovacevic out for it. And I'm not saying anyone should. Jonathan Kovacevic was great for the Devils. I'm not going to...
Sorry to interrupt, but they're also two very different types of defensemen, Kovacevic and Hamilton. Hamilton is your typical offensive defenseman. You'll live with his turnovers as long as he's generating his offense. Kovacevic, yes, I know early in the season it looked like, oh, wow, this guy's got some real offensive touch to his game. He doesn't really have that offensive touch to his game. You saw that as the season went on. They're two very different types of defensemen, Kovacevic and Hamilton. You cannot live with the turnovers that Kovacevic does because he doesn't generate that offense. That is one thing that Kovacevic, look, he fit in perfectly with the Devils, in the top four on that second pair. And that's great. And, obviously, and I've been hearing the same thing that Jim has been hearing, that he could be out, December, January, and, by the time he comes back from a conditioning assignment. But
or factor this in. Remember, the Olympics is in February. If they don't feel like he's good to go in late January or early February, he might not return until the second half of the season.
Right. And so he needs to figure out some things. Obviously, he first needs to get healthy. But also, one of the things, as I've been saying with goaltending about it being very volatile year over year, defensemen can also be a bit, not as much, but defensemen in terms of their offensive production, if they're not a typical offensive defenseman, like a Dougie Hamilton, like an Evan Bouchard, like a Luke Hughes, like if you're a more defensive type defenseman and you have, a year where, maybe your offensive numbers pop a little bit, but then, everything else shows that you don't really have that, it becomes very volatile in that. And so you can't live with Kovacevic having those turnovers as much as you can live with, let's say, Dougie having those type of turnovers.
Absolutely. And like I said, Kobe was good, but if you're going to give Dougie the treatment of turning the puck over, then you got to do the same thing for Kovacevic. Luke Hughes turns the puck over. Jack Hughes turns the puck over. But yeah, why is Dougie the poster child for it? That's my thing. Dougie's not as bad as advertised, and you can't. Now, if here's the pie in the sky. If the Devils are in the works to get like Quinn Hughes and the Canucks want Dougie, then by all means do that. But you have to have someone else in the works. That's just my thing. So, and also if you trade away Dougie for just a salary dump, who's going to generate the offense on the blue line aside from Luke Hughes? Because Siegenthaler's not going to do that. Pesci's not going to do that. Dillon's not going to do that. Kovacevic is not going to do that. That's not their jobs. And you're going to put all that pressure on Luke Hughes, maybe Shimon Nemitz, who says he wants to focus more on being a defensive stopper than an offensive conductor. Seamus Casey. I love Seamus and all, but they should really consider moving him to forward. He is undersized, and Sheldon Keefe has even said that it's easy to bench him just because he has a lot more kinks to work out. So that's my thing. So I agree with you. Dougie should not be traded under any circumstance unless you have something else in the works. Same with Dawson Mercer. Don't just unload those two just to unload those two. You got to have something else in the works. But Andre Palat, I think you need to take a play out the Rangers playbook, which is how do you unload a big contract so that way you free up some more money?
Absolutely. And again, Palat is a completely different story on things. But another thing that neither of us even touched on with Dougie, he's got the size. Yes, Quinn Hughes is a terrific defenseman, Norris caliber guy. He's undersized just like his brothers, Jack and Luke. You need some big defensemen. Yes, I know you've got Pesci and Dylan back there, but you can't just have two guys like that. You've got to have some size on the back end. So you can't say, oh, yeah, we'll get rid of Dougie and we're going to replace him with a small, speedy guy. No, you need to have that, yes, you need an offensive guy like Dougie, but you also need someone who's got his type of size. Otherwise, you're just going to get bowled over. And you just used the Rangers as an example. I hate using the Rangers as an example on a Devils podcast, but if you and your audience will indulge me for a minute, when the Rangers sent out their letter to begin their rebuild in 2018, they went with, they got rid of Ryan McDonough. Obviously, Dan Girardi was gone. Mark Stahl was shown the door, and they brought up a couple of young kids on the back end, John Gilmore and Neil Pionk. Okay, now we all know what Neil Pionk became over in Winnipeg in terms of a pretty solid point producing defenseman, but defensively, yeah, he holds his own, but he's undersized, and the Jets are able to shelter him a little bit. John Gilmore is out of the league, I believe, at this point. Yeah, he was fast, undersized. They got pushed around and bullied the whole thing. You can't have two small guys on the blue line. Yeah, one or two guys are by all means. If you've got one or two small guys on your back end who can skate like the wind and produce points, toil them over. You've got them. But you got to have, at least 3, if not 4, of your remaining 6 defensemen have to have some sort of size to them. That's just the way it is in the National Hockey League. And I know the game is faster than it's ever been, and it's not the bruising game that it was when it was the Broad Street Bully Flyers in the mid-'70s. But you do still have to have that size. Look at what happens in the playoffs every year. Okay, you get these young, speedy, small teams that make the playoffs. And guess what? They don't win the Stanley Cup. Who wins the Stanley Cup? The teams who win the Stanley Cup are the ones who have the size, who have the ability to play that tough, gritty game. Okay? Florida Panthers, last 2 years. They've got size. They can grind you down. Everyone says, oh, they're the villains of the NHL. You're damn right they're the villains of the NHL. They grind you down. They take pleasure in it. And you know what? It creates winning. Tampa Bay Lightning. They won 2 in a row. After they had their record-breaking season, they got swept in the first round by the Columbus Blue Jackets in one of the all-time upsets because they couldn't play that type of game. They went out, got players who can play that physical drawing game, and they won 2 straight Stanley Cups. The year the Colorado Avalanche won it, they just had such an overwhelming offense, but even they had some size to them and everything. The Vegas Golden Knights, grinding you down during that postseason run when they won the Stanley Cup. You want to keep going back, the St. Louis Blues, when they won it, can grind you down. The Washington Capitals, when they won it, they can grind you down. You cannot go all the way with just speed and skill, okay? If you are small, look at Jack Hughes, look at Luke Hughes. Both injured. Jack, 2 straight years has died injured. And yes, they've got all the speed in the world, all the skill in the world. Wouldn't trade them for anyone, unless you're saying, hey, we'll give you Connor McDavid for the 2 of them. But that's obviously not anywhere near realistic. One of the reasons why they get hurt, they're undersized. Yeah, you can have all the speed in the world, but in the NHL, you're going to get caught at some point. You're going to get hit at some point. And if you can't physically withstand that, that's when injuries occur, and that's when you're then not available to your team. So you have to have size, and you can't build a defense that's only small, speedy, and skillful.
Yeah, I mean, when people say, like, what do the Devils need? They need, like, aggression. They need, like, depth scoring. I'm like, I don't think it's pick one or the other. I think all goes hand in hand. Just look at the Panthers. They were the blueprint. They had, like, 6 different guys that honestly could have won the Conn Smythe Trophy. Like, if Brad Marchand were to win it, I don't think anybody would debate that. If it went to Sam Bennett, no one debated that. Could have gone to Sergei Bobrovsky. No one was going to debate that. Matthew Tkachuk, no one was going to debate it. The point is they had so many different contributors that I think anyone would have been okay with one of those like many players winning the Conn Smythe. And it goes to show you how deep their roster was. So I think they are the blueprint. And the fact that they're running it back with the same exact team, that's a little scary if you ask me. They could three-peat realistically, and they got a good coach in Paul Maurice. Matthew, to wrap things up, what are your expectations for the Devils? I don't think they're going to be a Stanley Cup team, but with how weak the Metro is, I don't think anyone should worry about them not being a playoff team.
So the Metro, as you said, it's projected to be a weak division this year as it was last year. The Devils, they absolutely have to be a playoff team. And, how they get to the playoffs, I think they're not going to win the division. Okay, I don't see them winning the division. It would be great if they did. I don't think they do. If they get in as a wild card team, I'll call that a disappointing way in. I'll call that a backing your way in type of thing. I think they have to maybe be better than the 3. I think they've got to finish in the 2. And I'll go down it team by team. Flyers are not making the playoffs. Okay, so you knocked one out. Pittsburgh's not making the playoffs. That's another one out. The Islanders, maybe they fight for a spot. Maybe they don't. I'm going to say the Islanders miss out on the playoffs because I think both wild cards will come out of the Atlantic. So I'm saying only 3 teams from the Metro are going to make it. The Rangers, I don't think they're going back to the playoffs just yet. I think there's more issues there under the hood than what people are willing to admit. So they're another team out. Columbus was feisty last year. They had the whole, inspired playing in the memory of Johnny Gaudreau. That's not going to quite work this year. Yes, Zach Werenski is great. Adam Fantilli is excellent. I think they can hang around a little bit in the race. I don't see Columbus taking that next step yet.
I'll just say this. I said this on my platform. The Blue Jackets turned a lot of heads. I am rooting for them. It's a team where they're not, like you said, not favorites to win and, not like a playoff team on paper, but I'll just say if all goes well for them, don't underestimate them. That's all I got to say.
I'm not underestimating them.
I'm not saying you are. I'm just saying, I'm saying in people in general.
I am rooting for them to do it. I think that they're maybe still a couple pieces away from, being a playoff team.
Yeah, I understand.
Washington's going to regress this year. I don't think they missed the playoffs in terms of regression, but they are going to regress. They're not chasing the President's Trophy this year. Ovi's another year older. I mean, I'm not going to be that stupid guy and be like, oh, yeah, Ovi's another year older. Guess what? He's not going to touch 40 again in terms of goals. You know what? I'm not even going to touch that. But I think they come back to the pack a little bit. Carolina's Carolina. I think the Devils finish 2. I think Carolina finishes 1 and Washington finishes 3. That's my early prediction. Now, obviously, things can change. Trades can happen. Signings can happen. Injuries can happen. Things can happen between now and opening night or now and the trade deadline, now and, the end of the regular season before the playoffs begin. But that would be my 1, 2, 3 for the Metropolitan Division. And I think the Devils, if they draw Washington in the first round and they're the higher seed, I think they get to the second round, and then, we'll see. I think they need to be they need to take that next step and be, able to show that they can at least make it to the Final Four. I don't see them making the Final Four just yet, but I think that with some tweaks, they maybe could. And then once you become a consistent Final Four team, then you're in the conversation as potential Stanley Cup team.
Well, Matthew, my guy, it was great having you on, and definitely going to have you on in a future episode. Where can my audience find you at?
Great. It's been a pleasure here. Obviously on Twitter /X, it's at Matthew Blittner. I do post a lot of my video interviews on Instagram, which is just at Matt Blittner. Don't ask why I went with Matt for one and Matthew for the other. Both accounts are very old. I obviously write for Sportsology, covering the Devils, have a weekly column as well that covers the entire NHL called Blittner's Blue Line. As we've mentioned, Jim Beeringer and I have a weekly podcast, Blue Line Blast, which you can find wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. 5-time author and philanthropist. If you'll indulge me for a second, I do have my 7th annual charity softball game for Alzheimer's research coming up this weekend. So, anyone who wants, come out to Brooklyn and support the cause while some of your favorite media members take on people from the community in a softball game. And other than that, yeah, that's where you can find me.
Awesome. Thanks, buddy. I saw your interviews, by the way, with like Ken Danico and all of them. Great work, as always. And like I do to close out every episode, continue to stay safe. Have a wonderful day. New Jersey, go Devils. I'll catch you guys in the next episode. Special thanks to my guest star, Matthew, and I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day.